Taking on ISIL in Afghanistan. Bombings kill at least 18 people, many of them minority Shia Muslims. Can the Taliban government contain security threats from ISIL and other armed groups? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The Afghan Taliban says it has arrested the so-called mastermind of a bomb attack on a mosque. Police say he's a major ISIL operative suspected of helping to kill at least 12 people in the northern city of Mazar-i-Sharif on Thursday. On the same day, the armed group claimed at least 2 attacks in Afghanistan, highlighting the security challenges for the Taliban since returning to power last August. ISIL detonated the remote-controlled bomb during midday prayers. The Sehdoken Mosque is one of the largest for the city's Hazara community. ISIL frequently targets the Shia Muslim minority.
The incident at the mosque was really heartbreaking. I was at the market and came to the site as fast as I could. Unfortunately, the toll of casualties and injuries is more than our expectations.
We urge the Islamic Emirate to pay more attention to the security of the people. How long will such incidents continue? Afghanistan's situation is so bad, we have no secure place to live.
ISIL also says it was behind a bus bomb blast in Kunduz city on Thursday. At least 4 mechanics working for the Taliban died there. On Tuesday, school children were targeted in a mainly Hazara Shia Muslim community. 2 explosions in the capital, Kabul, claimed 6 lives and injured 25. A UN report last month said attacks have killed nearly 400 civilians since the Taliban takeover last year. ISIL has been blamed for more than 80% of the bombings. All right, let's bring in our guests. From Kabul, Faiz Zaland, Executive Director of the Democracy, Peace and Development think tank. From Lahore in neighboring Pakistan, Rabia Akhtar, Director of the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research at the University of Lahore. And also from the Afghan capital, Neil Turner, Country Director in Afghanistan for the Norwegian Refugee Council. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Faiz, let me start with you today. How serious a security challenge does ISIL remain in Afghanistan?
Thanks for having me. Actually, since the fall of Kabul, 15th of August, Taliban were pretty much in comfort zone. They haven't realized that there are still very significant threats for the security of the country. Specifically, the monopoly of the power has created vacuum regarding the public opinion. ISIS itself, it's not a challenge for the recent after the fall, but it has been a challenge, security challenge for past many years now. Since 2013, there are time to time blasts and attacks coming on, and then 2016, it has taken a momentum. Now with recent incidents, which are very harsh, and it has created a big sorrow and anger among ordinary Afghans and a big loss. Today also there is a blast in Kunduz, Imam Sahib province district. So this is going to be a big challenge for Taliban because of the lack of capacity on the surveillance, regional cooperation, counterinsurgency and counterterrorism capacity. All these incapacities will create more challenges for Taliban to overcome this threat.
Rabia, how concerned are Afghanistan's neighbors about the impact the security situation in Afghanistan could have in the region?
Thank you so much for having me. I think specifically for Pakistan, it is a grave concern. And this concern has been there ever since Taliban have taken over. But the situation has deteriorated over a period of, since Taliban's takeover in August last year. And I think it's not only a concern for Pakistan, it's a concern for Iran, it's a concern for broader region as well with other countries that, Taliban, although they made a lot of promises during the Afghan peace process that they will have control of their borders, it seems now that with the recent resurgence of TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and also ISIS attacks inside Pakistan, that Taliban no longer have control of their own borders, not only their own borders, but also inside their territory. So the concern is absolutely grave.
Neil, let's talk for a moment about how the overall security situation in Afghanistan is impacting the distribution of aid inside of Afghanistan. I mean, the fact that this violence is happening now, how much more difficult does it make it for yourself, your colleagues, other aid organizations to actually get that much needed aid to the people who need it most?
I think at the moment that the aid and humanitarian action in Afghanistan is proceeding quite well. We've come through a winter period where we were very worried about supporting people during the cold months, and that by and large has been achieved. I think currently we are seeing signs of increased insecurity. Last week's attack on the Abdul Rahim Shahid boys' school was obviously very shocking. And that impacts on the ability, particularly if schools are targeted in that way, for us to provide education for students in Afghanistan. But at the moment, we're not seeing any specific impact on what we're trying to do. And I think that there are obviously worries for the future if things intensify. But our concern is mainly getting on with the job of looking at delivering humanitarian aid at the moment, and then moving to a situation where development assistance can also enter the country, because humanitarian assistance is only going to take us so far. And we also need to look at the economic collapse, which has occurred over the last few months, and what we can do about that. And obviously, if the insecurity affects a resumption of development assistance to Afghanistan, then that would be of serious concern.
Faiz, I know you touched on this a bit in your previous answer, but would you say that the overall level of violence and the number of bombings in Afghanistan, have they risen or declined since the Taliban returned to power last August?
Yeah, well, for sure, the security has gotten better because before 15th of August, we were in a big war. 34 provinces and more than 400 districts were all at war. There were bombardments from the US troops and the previous government, and there were attacks from Taliban, target killing, ambushes. Everything was happening in a high peak. The numbers of incidents have decreased noticeably. But the problem is with the recent wave of attacks in mosques, schools, and big gatherings, specifically in Shia minorities, it is increasing worries, and it creates worry that Afghanistan is getting into another phase of war. Secondly, it is the first spring and summer after the takeover of Taliban. So Afghanistan is usually, in past 20 years, it was a fight. Each spring was beginning with fight and attacks. And this first spring of Taliban takeover of Kabul has started with such blasts. It also creates the worry that we are going into insecurity and another war and another destabilization.
Rabia, tensions are rising now between Pakistan and Afghanistan. What's behind the airstrikes that Pakistan conducted inside of Afghanistan last week?
So Pakistan has not officially come out and accepted that the strikes actually were made by Pakistan. So there's no official statement as yet. I think Pakistan and Afghanistan, over a period of this period since August last year, have undergone a recalculation of their relationship with each other. I would divide that into three phases of good, bad, and ugly, and we are in the ugly phase right now. Whatever expectations Pakistan had from the Taliban that TTP would be curtailed and Afghanistan's territory of Afghanistan will not be allowed for them to be used under the Taliban regime. They have not come forth. So that is at the heart of the deteriorating relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And Pakistan's Achilles heel is absolutely the presence of TTP in Afghanistan. There's just no question about it. And the recent, I have some stats about emboldenment that TTP has faced since August last year. There are 256 attacks reportedly accepted by TTP since August last year, which have killed Pakistani security forces and soldiers alike. Hundreds of them have been killed. In this month alone, TTP has claimed more than 40 attacks. So this is not something minor and acceptable to Pakistan. This is one thing. And the secondly, Pakistan is, fencing its borders. And that also is problematic. There is no, solid commitment that has been given by the Taliban to Pakistan that border fencing is acceptable. We've seen some clashes over it in some parts as well. So with respect to TTP and border fencing, I think counterterrorism still remains Pakistan's highest priority. And, probably will go to any extent to safeguard its territory if the Afghan Taliban do not take concrete actions to stop TTP from using Afghan territory against Pakistan.
Neil, the Norwegian Refugee Council, your organization, they said last month that the economic crash unraveling since August 2021 has driven levels of humanitarian needs while also making the aid response challenging. I just want to ask you, how much more vulnerable is all of this making communities that are already vulnerable?
Well, I think if you look at the appeal that was recently made at the end of March, we have 24 million people at risk, which is half the population, at least, of Afghanistan. Of those, I think we're concentrating most on the 9 million, which are at risk of starvation. The figures are startling in relation to UNDP reports, which suggest that 97% of the population will be in poverty by mid-2022. The situation in Afghanistan was bad before. It was almost 75% in poverty. But obviously, when you reach close to 100%, this represents a complete economic collapse of the situation. So we're seeing many more people still vulnerable. I myself was in a IDP settlement the other day, and there were reports from families saying that they are really cutting down on the meals that they eat per day. I witnessed people cooking on plastic, and also we hear stories of children being sent to work in hazardous conditions or begging, and also girls being forced into early marriage. So all of these things are symptoms of an almost complete economic collapse. And humanitarians can fill the gap in the short term. But what we need is actually a restarting of the economy. And the World Bank is having their spring meetings at the moment and discussing the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. And it's really important that that money flows and that money is released in the right way, so that things can continue for the wider economy to be reestablished.
Neil, let me just follow up with you for a second. You're talking about the importance of the money, flowing into the country, the restarting of the economy. I've spoken to others of your colleagues on this program in the last few months talking about that issue, about the fact that the restrictions on the banking system in Afghanistan, that is really hampering the efforts of aid agencies. So I want to ask you how much more difficult it makes your work when it's so difficult getting money, getting resources into the country for yourself and for other organizations?
Well, we've solved the problem in the short term with what is called the UN corridor, which is assisting us to bring money into the country. That money is brought in cash. and then is deposited in a bank and we're able to use it. The problems are around the central bank, which is still not functional, and the commercial banking system, and also the private banking international financial system, which still is risk averse and can't properly function and bring money in as it would. And also, obviously, Afghan businesses find it difficult to access credit and normal banking procedures. So there have been some advances. Things are getting slightly better, but we're still in a situation where we've been forced to create an unusual measure. And there are other humanitarian agencies that are not in the position that we are in, and therefore they're also having difficulties, particularly national NGOs in terms of how they operate. For us, we fix the problem in the short term, but the longer term problems remain.
Rabia, I saw you nodding along to some of what Neil was saying. Did you want to jump in?
I think, the challenge Neil has mentioned, international community is facing, and I'm really glad that Norway has taken lead and broken some of the, impasse that the international community has faced. And I know that through reports that Norway has received a lot of criticism as well for engaging with the Taliban, but at least they have the guts to get in there and, do something about the humanitarian crisis. But the situation definitely is difficult, and it's going to continue to remain difficult. And my only concern, as somebody who looks at the regional security situation, is that, there is a lot of speculation out there that, ISIS attacking, Hazaras or just creating chaos for the Taliban probably serves Taliban's interest, because it brings international attention to the Taliban, because they can tell the international community that, we don't have control over the situation. We need counterterrorism assistance. So first it was humanitarian assistance, and then now things are moving slowly towards bringing attention to counterterrorism assistance. So I think things are going to get worse from here onwards because recognition for the Taliban are not coming from any quarters.
Faiz, you just heard Rabia there talk about recognition not coming from anywhere for the Taliban. What does the Taliban think about this? Are they still seeking recognition? Do they think that international recognition might be happening anytime soon?
Actually, they expected the international recognition at the very beginning of their coming back to power. They tried their best. They traveled a lot around the world. They visited Europe. They were in Norway, in Oslo, to convince the Europeans. They communicated in several conferences with Islamic countries and also with US delegates. They thought that it will be an easy task, but it seems the path is very jumpy and very difficult for them. With their recent decision-making on girls' schools, women rights not been allowed to work, and also on the monopoly of the power, no inclusivity. And now the challenge of the insecurity is coming. The speculation might be right, but I think if Taliban are somehow entertaining such insecurity, they are losing public opinion regarding themselves. There is another resistance, which they call themselves national resistance. It is very beginning. They might take momentum with such incidents if it affects a minority, if it affects a specific group of people. So these are those biggest challenges that Taliban are somehow stuck in the cycle, rather than concerning now for the international legitimacy or recognition. Domestically, they face too many problems. Humanitarian assistance is not only the one now, the insecurity, the domestic clashes and contractions regarding different sects and different organizations and ethnicities now.
Faiz, we were talking to Rabia before about the tensions between Pakistan and the Taliban, and I want to ask you, Is the Taliban, concerned, or how concerned are they by the increase in tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan of late?
I think the tension, it is very unfortunate. Everybody was believing that once Taliban were back in Kabul, Pakistan might change its policy toward Afghanistan. But Pakistan has kept its policy. Destabilizing Kabul somehow pays off for Pakistan. The Durand Line issue, the forward policy, increasing its involvement on the Durand Line, and somehow pushing now Taliban. Previously, they were pushing Kaza and then Ghani for recognition. They fenced the Durand Line. They put gates on the Durand Line. They made it official transit for the Durand Line. Now they are somehow pushing for this TTP problem. We must not forget that Pakistan was officially having a strategy of good Taliban and bad Taliban. Now that good Taliban and bad Taliban somehow provokes back against Pakistan interests. So Pakistan is taking its internal conflict, internal issue, internal strategy toward Afghanistan, somehow creating a regional problem for Taliban, which was bettering off from the beginning. Taliban were thinking that they might get very soon a startup for TAPI, Casa 1000 project, a rail project from Uzbekistan to Lahore or Pakistan. But now all these things seem somehow in a dream which may not come true within Taliban in power.
Rabia, are other countries in the region putting pressure on the Taliban right now to do more to contain the threats from ISIL and from other armed groups? And if so, how much pressure is being applied?
I would like to just, comment on what Faiz said, if you allow me, to point out a contradiction in his statement, which is that, how is it beneficial for Pakistan to have an upset and destabilized western border when it already has an equally fragile eastern border with India? And the contradiction is that, TAPI and CASA and, Chinese interest in Afghanistan for extension of CPEC, how does it serve Pakistan's interest to have a destabilized Afghanistan if it wants economic security to be its future and play a role in connecting the region? So that is beyond me. With respect to, ISIS situation in the region, I think the concerns are grave, but I do not see many countries coming out in the region and putting pressure on the Taliban. I think there's much happening in the region with respect to, Russia and Ukraine and as to how that situation is evolving. So far, I have yet to see, besides Pakistan, anybody, putting pressure on the Taliban to curtail the activities of ISIS before a spillover happens. And God forbid, we should not wait for a huge attack, killing hundreds of civilians in order for that to happen. So I hope the region wakes up and gives a call to the Taliban. And Pakistan itself should draw some red lines with the Taliban if it hasn't done so already. TTP is one of them, border fencing is the other, and recognition of international border, that commitment needs to come from the Taliban. I think Pakistan needs to specify these red lines and thresholds very, very clearly in no uncertain terms.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Faiz, Zaland, Rabia, Akhtar, and Neil Turner. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, the whole team here. Bye for now.